Hello, I'm Dr. Shannon Farrell, and I'm the leader of the project entitled Mental Health Issues for Farmers, Their Families, and Their Communities. And while that may be a long title, our goal is simple. We just want to provide you with the resources that you need to improve your mental well-being. This project wouldn't have been possible without funding provided by USDA NEFA through the Southern Risk Management Education Center, and we're very grateful for their support. The agriculture industry is no stranger to disaster. Today's presentation by Dr. Gallus is titled Down on the Farm When Disaster Hits. Dr. Gallus will teach you about the impacts of disasters not only on individuals but on their communities. She'll also teach you the 6 steps involved in providing mental health first aid to a disaster survivor. Along with this presentation is a very quick survey to complete after you've watched, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback on that survey. Additionally, you'll find a link to the project website with many more resources that you might find useful. We appreciate your time in watching and joining us today.
Hello and welcome. My name is Gallus. I'm an Associate Professor of Marriage and Family Therapy and the Co-Director for the Institute for Developmental Disabilities at Oklahoma State University. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share today's webinar, Down on the Farm When Disaster Hits. While talking about times of stress and crisis aren't always the most fun thing to talk about, I'm hopeful that you leave our time today empowered with new understanding and skills to help you help people, your family members, your community members, your neighbors, and other community members that are part of the farming communities across Oklahoma, so that you can effectively and efficiently respond in the immediate aftermath of disaster. I'm proud to share that I'm pretty familiar with farm life. I was raised on a farm in south central Kansas, and my father comes from a long, strong line of farmers who work the land in Woods County, Oklahoma. I know that farming is more than just an occupation. It's a way of life, and it's a source of identity not only for the farmer, but for the families and community they are a part of. I'm a farmer's daughter, raised in a farm family in a farming community, and being a farmer's daughter is a large part of my identity and a very strong source of pride. There are many days that I miss this simpler life on the farm. The picture here is of me and my older brother eating our dirt-filled wheat harvest lunch on the side of a rural county road. That gives just a small glimpse of that sort of oasis apart from the fast pace of life that my childhood on the farm still often represents to me today. But growing up during the farm crisis of the 80s, I also knew full well that this oasis is only part of the story of the farm. Truth be told, agriculture is a risky business. As a master's student in marriage and family therapy at Kansas State University, I had the honor of working as a family resource specialist for the Kansas Rural Family Helpline. The stories coming from countless Kansas farm families who contacted us looking for support and services in times of disaster and stress reiterated what I learned so intimately growing up on the farm. Farming is an intensely and inherently stressful profession. And a huge part of life on the farm is learning to cope with the things that are simply out of our control. I think that's where words like disaster, stress, and crisis quickly and often, all too frequently, enter into the reality of life on the farm. A disaster can be defined as an event that occurs in most cases suddenly and unexpectedly, causing severe disturbance to people or objects affected by it, and resulting in a loss of life and harm to the health of the population and the destruction and loss of community property and severe damage to the environment. For many of you, hearing the word disaster brings to your mind the common natural disasters that challenge agricultural production, like droughts and tornadoes, or floods, the most common natural disaster in Oklahoma. For others, thoughts of human-made disasters come to mind, such as hazardous materials or transportation accidents, fires, terrorist attack, or the most recent COVID-19 pandemic may come to mind. Overall, the term defines the many events that we have little to no control over, yet deeply and drastically impact our lives. For many farmers, life on the farm is defined by the ongoing, overwhelming fear of financial disaster that often follows years of hardship brought on by ongoing natural and/or human-made disasters. These disasters have resulted in loss of harvest or livestock, increased susceptibility to disease, and the destruction of irrigation systems or other agricultural infrastructure. Over the time, this is a culmination of numerous disasters threatens the ultimate farm disaster: a foreclosure notice, a farm auction, even bankruptcy. Many farmers feel overwhelmed by the lingering stress of financial disaster. In fact, some research suggests that farming is consistently among the top 10 most stressful and dangerous occupations. No two disasters are alike. As we've already distinguished, that disasters can be human-made or occur naturally. Natural disasters are the primary professional hazard for farmers. Research suggests survivors place different meanings to disasters that occur naturally compared to those brought on by human error, such as accidents. Perhaps the negative intent and the meaning or understanding given to disasters that are human-made are often found to have a negative impact on survivors' recovery. We also know that the time for preparation and the time in that crisis, whether immediate or prolonged, affects the impact and response. Finally, another important way of typing disasters that's often overlooked refers to the community impact. Centripetal disasters refer to disasters that strike an existing community, whereas centrifugal refers to disasters that strike a group of people that are congregated temporarily. What are the characteristics of your most recent local disaster? As you reflect on the disaster that comes to mind, what were or are some of the repercussions of that event? What was the individual and community impact? And how might that unique characteristic of the event have played a role on those repercussions? It's important to remember that regardless of the size or magnitude of disaster, it can be an overwhelming and lasting impact on the lives of people affected. Additionally, the occurrence of a disaster in the recent past, say within the last 3 years, can have a significant impact on individual and collective trauma. People and communities may be feeling that they've just started to rebound and recover from the last disaster, only to be hit by a new disaster that causes additional setbacks in the recovery process. Just as the specific characteristics of no two disasters are the same, we too find that each disaster affects people and communities in different ways. It's important to remember that it is very common for disaster survivors to have reactions to their experiences. Disaster survivors may show physical, emotional, and/or mental signs of stress, and disasters often have financial impacts. Sometimes the word normal is used rather than common in the content of describing a person's reaction to disaster. However, the use of the word normal can be emotionally laden. The reaction can feel anything but normal to the person experiencing them. So we tend to prefer the adjective of common when referring to the experience. We know that while not comfortable for many, stress and grief are common and uncommon circumstances to disaster. Sadness, grief, and anger are just some of those common experiences and emotions. We also know that disaster can have a ripple effect. So reactions may not only occur to the individual directly impacted, but we also know that they're going to have an indirect effect on those repeatedly exposed to the event through coverage on the media or just through their natural relationships. Still, we know that most people affected by disaster have natural resilience to support themselves in recovery. In fact, research shows that most survivors will recover to a former functioning level within 6 to 18 months following the disaster, and that's even without outside mental health interventions. A primary task of helping people following trauma and disaster is simply helping them access their support systems and develop those positive coping skills to diminish adverse reactions and disruptions in daily living that may be caused by the disaster. Finally, research demonstrates that unlike some other traumatic events, such as abuse that are often more isolating in nature, people tend to really pull together during disaster. And we know that a positive interpersonal response to disaster is highly associated with individual post-disaster resilience. Relationships serve an important post-disaster protective factor for survivors. When family members and friends, when neighbors and communities pull together, we know we do better. But we also know that while people generally pull together after and during a disaster, they may be functioning at a high level of activity with a low level of efficiency. While much thought and preparation is often put into preparing the farm for disasters, think about what Oklahoman farmers are doing to implement water and land management strategies or maintain vaccination records and purchase records for their livestock, all to mitigate risks, we're not always as good at preparing the people, the farmers, the families, the communities. So how do we efficiently and effectively respond when disaster hits? Most of us know about first aid for the physical injuries. Check the scene for danger, stabilize, call for help, all actions focused on promoting the 3 Ps: preserve life, prevent further injury, promote physical recovery. But what about the emotional and mental wounds of disaster? How do we help people whose psychological well-being is struggling in the immediate and long-term aftermath of disaster? We used to think that after a crisis or disaster, or after someone was in a difficult situation, they needed to debrief. They needed to talk about all the major details of the events that they had gone through. But research following 9/11 has challenged much of our thinking and introduced a new perspective on dealing with grief, loss, and trauma. And that often looks much different than what we originally thought. We know that most people, like I said, are going to recover from major crises and disasters on their own. They don't need professional help. In fact, our research suggests that forcing people to debrief and talk about it may actually hurt them. So rather than focusing on debriefing, research suggests that intervention and prevention efforts during the early and midterm stages of disaster should focus on promoting 5 things: a sense of safety, calming, a sense of self and community efficacy, connectedness, and hope. Psychological first aid is an approach to helping people following a disaster that's based on these 5 principles of early disaster response. Psychological first aid isn't a treatment, but like first aid, it's designed to help others know what steps to take to stabilize the survivor. It's a modular approach, which means you can pick and choose just-in-time approaches to best meet the disaster scenarios you're facing. As I often tell my marriage and family therapy students as we talk about psychological first aid, these steps to promote are not so much rules as guidelines. And like first aid, psychological first aid is something anyone can do, as it utilizes the skills you likely already have. Today we'll break down the full psychological first aid approach into 6 easy-to-remember steps across 3 phases focused on enhancing safety, functioning, and action. I'm hopeful that by breaking down your response into these 6 steps, you can build some sort of sense of confidence, and this will hopefully help guide you through a calm, thoughtful, and strength-based response when you're faced with disaster. These 6 steps are designed to emotionally and mentally stabilize the survivor. In fact, research has found that these stabilizing steps are key in preventing negative long-term responses post-disaster. Let's get started. Step 1, safeguard. Similar to traditional first aid, we begin by enhancing and ensuring the immediate physical safety and security of the survivor. This is a crucial first step that metaphorically throws a life preserver to the survivor. It's crucial to quickly but deliberately observe the surroundings and scenarios first before you take action. We want to protect and secure additional disaster or trauma to you and our other survivors. By removing survivors from the scene and harm's way, we're hoping to provide some sense of shelter from ongoing and potential reminders of the trauma as well. Step 2, sustain. This is also focused on enhancing the survivor's safety. This step reminds us to check to make sure the person's basic physical needs are met. That could be food and water, that could be medical care, clothing or blankets, potentially even turning on the power or making sure someone has access to air conditioning or heating. Again, focus on enhancing the safety of the individual. Step 3, once we ensure basic physical safety, we begin focusing on enhancing emotional and mental functioning by offering emotional and mental comfort. This step reminds us of the importance of establishing a compassionate presence. Be sure to speak calmly and slowly. Ask simple, respectful questions. Listen actively and be patient, responsive, and sensitive. You also want to really help that person feel more present, there with you in the moment. Ask questions about where they are and their surroundings but also avoid asking in-depth descriptions of the traumatic disaster experiences. If survivors are anxious to talk about those experiences, tell them that for now, you just need the basic information so that you can make sure their most immediate current needs are met. Let them know that they can discuss those experiences and the specific details in a proper professional setting in the future. This is also a great time to start to apply those basic stress management techniques to promote calming. Encourage the survivor to join you in focusing on taking some deep breaths. Inhale through the nose, exhaling through the mouth. Interestingly, breathing is the only automatic body function that we also can mindfully control. We know that when we experience the stressors of adverse life events, our bodies naturally activate what we know as the fight or flight response. Research shows that by simply engaging in the technique of breath-focused attention, lowers activity in our amygdala, which is our brain center of fear and anxiety. And by focusing on our breath, we can help that person feel in control in a situation where they're feeling very out of control. Reassure them that their reactions are common. Let the person know it's common to feel a wide range of emotions, to feel out of control. Everything they're thinking and feeling, there are no right or wrongs here, and help them to make sense of that in that current situation. An additional goal of our step 3 of comfort is to begin specifically identifying individuals who may need additional supports or services. Like we talked about, it's common to be in shock when you're in a scenario of disaster and crisis. Maybe you're feeling like you're out of your body or things aren't real. That's what actually us therapists call dissociation, and it's common, particularly within those first 48 hours of a disaster. But it also can be something that is hard for others to handle, and if long-lasting, we also know it's highly associated with severe negative long-term responses to disaster. Again, while the majority of people exposed to disasters recover fully from the emotional, mental, and behavioral experiences following disaster with only a minor disruption in quality of life, still 10 to 35% experience severe adverse reactions, whether those be emotional, psychological, or even substance use and substance abuse. And these are scenarios that require additional intervention from professionals. Listed here are some signs a person may need additional focus on calming and stabilization skills and potential referral for professional intervention. It's the survivor with the glassy-eyed, vacant 1,000-yard stare, or the survivor who seems mentally preoccupied, maybe the conscious and aware but unresponsive. They may be disoriented, kind of in a haze. The inconsolable survivor with those really strong emotions, the survivor with uncontrollable and severe physical reactions, sometimes that might look like vomiting or the loss of bowel or bladder control, and the frantic survivor who is searching frantically for both important and sometimes very unimportant things. Most of these individuals are not going to self-identify as needing additional services, and many will never seek formal help on their own. It's important to be on the lookout for the wounded survivors who need additional supports following the immediate disaster response. Step 4, connect. The number one thing that helps people heal after disaster and trauma is connecting the people that they're close to. That means family, friends, coaches, pets, community leaders, clergy, support groups. Our goal here is to establish brief and ongoing supports that the person is going to need in the days and weeks that follow. When we're alone, we ruminate. We think about the things over and over, and we don't get that important reality check from outside people. We also know that when we're not speaking, we're storing. Getting social support also sets into place long-term support that the person is going to need in the days and weeks to come. Encourage the use of immediate available support persons, whether that's the American Red Cross that's on site for the disaster or the person's church. Ask the person if they have religious or spiritual needs or beliefs, and refer them to individuals in the community that coincide with that member's choice. Step 5, educate. It's hard to deal with problems when you're emotionally struggling, when you're in the middle of a crisis. You want to get information on what are the challenges the person is facing and help them to overcome them. Maybe they need help making some arrangements for a place to stay for the next few days. Or maybe they need to get in contact with their pastor, their banker, their insurance agent. This is an opportunity to offer practical support and information. The other person might not have a good understanding of what's happening in the middle of the crisis. So it's also helpful to provide information about what's going on. If you have that information, give it to them. Again, just make sure you don't ask for details about the traumatic event that the person has gone through. Remember, for some people, that makes them feel worse. And it can also be a way of spreading the trauma as it passes along additional details to you and to other survivors that just adds layers of experiences to the disaster. Survivors also may need to know what to expect and what's common responses. So it might be helpful to share some of the stuff that I shared with you, that most people are going to naturally recover, that they have the natural social supports and services that they need to do better in the long term. Step 6, empower. This step is focused on enhancing a sense of control for the survivor. So acknowledge the survivor's strengths. Support them in resuming normal activities. Disaster causes a disruption in normal patterns of life. Making sure someone is having regular meals, just getting natural sleep, and getting regular activity are critical elements of psychological first aid. You also want to talk about ways people can deal with the powerful emotions that come up in the situations, whether that's anxiety, sadness, or anger. Help people identify ways of coping that work for them, like listening to music, hobbies, journaling, walking, watching TV or movies, whatever helps and makes them feel better, and encourage them also to engage in family care practices. Respect that getting back to work can be a healthy part of recovery. There is a lot about the typical components of farm work, whether that's tilling the field, planting the crops, building fence, or feeding livestock, that can actually represent a lot of the comforting and mindful activities we want to encourage and empower survivors to engage in. One of the most important aspects of psychological first aid is identifying and referring to treatment those individuals who are experiencing the severe reactions. The extent of severe reactions is partially dependent on the type of disaster, the extent of disturbance or interruption in typical daily life, and mortality rates of a particular disaster. People who have pre-existing challenges or trauma may also be at risk for severe reactions. Negative coping can look like social isolation or withdrawal, extreme avoidance of thinking or talking about the event, workaholism, anger or violence, or frequent dependent use of alcohol or other drugs. If you're worried someone's at risk for hurting themselves, don't be afraid to ask them if they're having any suicidal thoughts. Asking someone if they have any thoughts or plans of hurting or harming themselves is not going to put those thoughts in their head. No matter the response or the answer to your questions, when survivors show severe reactions and negative coping, it's important to connect them with professional support. It's important to remember that survivors typically do not seek mental health or substance abuse treatment on their own. For some, the farming mentality and the pride that often works for us also demands self-reliance at all costs. For others, it's the stigma of mental health issues that leads them to reject help, arguing that others need it more than I do. Overcoming this stigma is a central challenge in psychological first aid, as most people served have never been treated by the traditional mental health or substance abuse system services. When making a referral for ongoing mental health services, be thoughtful of potentially stigmatizing language. Normalize intervention and educate them in regards to the types of services, assessments, interventions, what sessions may even look like. Access to services in rural Oklahoma can sometimes be an issue. People may be resistant to seek out services if they are limited, difficult to access, or located outside of their own community. When possible, provide a warm handoff to a professional you know and follow up on these issues. Don't be afraid to bring it back up with the survivor. On a final note, as I mentioned before, there is a ripple effect to disaster, and it touches every person that comes into contact with it, no matter how direct or remote. I cannot overstate the importance of self-care. You cannot not take your own humanity into the equation. Remember, this is just first aid. You are not expected and should not be doing the work of mental health professionals. Know your capabilities and your professional limits. Monitor your own emotional, mental, and physical responses and respect your personal limits. And protect against secondary trauma responses. Remember, you don't need to know the details of the disaster or the trauma. All you need to do is help them to enhance their safety, functioning, and action through those simple 6 easy to remember steps. I'd love to hear from you if you're interested in learning more about disaster response or the mental, emotional, or relational impact of stress and trauma, or if you have any questions I can answer. Thanks so much for joining me.